Today we're going to be talking about social isolation and social connectedness. We'll talk for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then I'll allow for a couple of minutes for question and answer and any discussion that we think is appropriate and pertinent. The chat feature should be enabled. So if things arise during the presentation you want to be sure to comment on, please feel free. I probably won't address it during the presentation, but we'll happily address it towards the end. And today, please feel free to participate however is comfortable for you. That could mean watching quietly, or it could mean a lot of discussion in the chat. Whatever works for you, either or anything in between is totally fine. My name is Christine Mole. I'm a licensed clinical social worker based in New Jersey. I'm a therapist and I specialize in working with children and adolescents, but I also do have some adult clients. And my specialties are in trauma and mood disorders. I'm also a mental health consultant, so I work with camps and schools and organizations to help them be mental health informed. And I'm also a children's yoga and mindfulness instructor. So this is what we will be talking about today. We'll discuss human nature and our innate need for connection with others. Then we'll look at many risks associated with social isolation, reviewing some of the research that's been conducted in that area. And then similarly, we'll examine the benefits of good social connection and support. Last, we'll spend some time looking and talking about how we can remain connected in our current situation, dealing with the pandemic whose response often limits our ability to connect with other people. People are never too young or old to look for connection. So the good news is that whether you're in your 20s or your 90s, there are still opportunities for you to connect with other people, and we're constantly finding new ways to do that. As I mentioned earlier, it is in our deepest human nature to be with other people. Thinking back to the earliest iterations of humans, we traveled together in groups in order to maintain safety, to procreate, and to slowly develop more sophisticated systems. Other people help us to form our identity. So we look at other people and either identify with them and say, hey, that person is a lot like me, or we perceive difference and we say, oh, that's not really me. We use other people to kind of decide who we are. We also rely on other people for information, for instrumental support, meaning they help us to access the most basic needs. We rely on other people for entertainment, for survival, for procreation, and for comfort. And as we discuss needing one another, it can be helpful to view this through the lens of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So Maslow is a psychologist who designed this hierarchy to help us conceptualize all of our human needs, from the most basic and crucial to our survival to those that allow us to live our most fulfilling life, really to thrive. And these two bottom tiers are where we have the most basic needs, the one most crucial to our survival. So things like food, water, shelter, oxygen. And then on the second tier is safety and security. And this is also a basic need. Humans can function at their optimal level when they have some predictability and some control and a sense of security. Without those things, we really operate from that trauma or stress response. Some of you may have heard of the fight, flight, or freeze response. And that's really not meant to be a prolonged state for us. In fact, when we are in that stress mode for too long, certain body functions shut down. So things like our reproductive system, and our digestive system are not working optimally because we are using all of our energy to pump cortisol and adrenaline. So at the end of the day, we really don't want to be in that stress response for long, which is why safety and security are so essential to our survival. So examples of this might be having basic human rights, financial security, feeling safe in one's home and community, and feeling protected. At the very least, in these two areas, our existence is acknowledged and we're able to have our needs met. As we move up the pyramid, these elements have to do more with our psychological needs. So the need for acceptance and belonging, which we often get from friends, families, our communities. And as we move up, we see our needs and desires for happiness and fulfillment through being admired and respected. And lastly, reaching our full potentials, often meaning that we have power over others or we can influence people. So this is kind of how we see priorities as human needs, excuse me. And often we don't get all the way to the top in our lives. But the idea is we cannot reach those higher needs like esteem and self actualization without first meeting the more basic ones. And I would argue that even the most basic needs cannot be met if we are truly isolated. Think of how many of these needs on here can't be met without support of some kind. Unless you've built your own house and you're filtering your own water and growing your own food, you're relying on social networks to help you stay alive. We also know that our survival is impacted as we move up a pyramid and talk more about the connection piece. And research is going to show us that social connection and support are really essential to our health as well. So, as we begin to look at how people benefit from social connectedness, I want to highlight some terms that we'll use today. You'll also often hear me using social support and social connection together because a lot of the research pairs those two, but the definitions are slightly different. So, social support is really that receipt of assistance or comfort from other people. And that helps us to cope with biological, psychological, and social stressors. It can be anything from emotional support to, helping us meet those basic needs. Whereas social connection is really the subjective feeling of being close to other people, feeling like one belongs, and feeling like somebody is understood. And then last, social isolation is simply the lack of social connection. And we want to be mindful to distinguish social isolation from loneliness. Social isolation is the objective fact of being cut off from others, whereas loneliness is really a perception, it's a subjective experience. So somebody can have 100 people in their support network and still feel lonely. And that's a really important distinction we want to make. We'll see as we move forward that social connection is really above all subjective and that our needs vary depending on our personalities. So you can see here, different personalities require different levels of social connection. So some people, like introverts, may need very little relatively social interaction to meet that level of satisfaction. Whereas people who are extroverts really need a lot more social connection to feel that same level. So again, we want to emphasize that this is subjective. And as we go through the data, we'll see that social connection and social support are often subjective as how they're conceptualized in the data. So they're really based on perception. So we'll spend a few minutes reviewing some of the research that has been conducted about the detriments of social isolation. There are actually very significant mental and physical health outcomes associated with it. So here are 8 areas which are directly affected by lack of social supports and connection, supported by a lot of studies. First, a review of the research demonstrates that social isolation poses a greater risk to health than obesity, smoking, and high blood pressure, even when controlling for a person's daily habits. So studies have found that those who had social connections but unhealthy lifestyle choices lived longer than those with poor social ties but healthier habits. One study suggests that social isolation and loneliness are as harmful to one's health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, and that they're twice as harmful to physical and mental health as obesity. Studies also suggest that social isolation contributes to inflammation at a cellular level and slows recovery from disease. Without connection, our bodies struggle to turn off inflammation. And we know that chronic inflammation in the body can damage DNA and lead to heart disease, arthritis, type 2 diabetes, cancer, Alzheimer's, and even suicide. We see that isolation can lead to shorter life expectancy as well. A study done by Berkman and Syme demonstrated that people who felt disconnected from others were 3 times more likely to die during this 9-year study than those with social ties. And multiple studies suggest that isolation contributes to worsening cardiovascular disease, repeat heart attacks, and high blood pressure. We also see that social isolation causes elevated levels of stress. Stress causes our body to release more cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and cytokines, placing tremendous pressure on the immune system. So excessive production of cortisol can lead to brain damage, poor coping, increased inflammation, reduced ability to problem solve, and increased adipose or belly fat. In addition to this, we learned that social isolation is in fact a stressor itself. So, once again, that leads to the suppression of the immune system. We saw one study where in HIV patients, Those who felt more socially disconnected had fewer helper T cells, which are crucial to their survival and recovery from the illness. And then we move into mental health. Multiple studies demonstrate that social isolation is detrimental to mental health and contributes directly to depression and anxiety. We know that those who perceive insufficient support are more likely to suffer from mental illness in general. Social isolation is often a symptom of mental health disorders as well, like depression and anxiety. So we may see this vicious cycle. So a person isolates because they're feeling incredibly anxious or depressed, and then they perceive less connection and support, which may exacerbate their mental health condition. So see how that cycles. And it's very similar to what happens with addiction. In addiction and recovery circles, a popular quote is the opposite of addiction is connection. So, similar to the mental health disorders we just discussed, again, we see that cycle play out. When a person is struggling with addiction, they tend to isolate, which may cause them to perceive less support. And then again, that may exacerbate the condition and vice versa. Um, so we also know that one protective factor in helping people to recover from addiction is social support. It's absolutely crucial, from family and friends, but also from groups like AA and NA, and from sponsors who offer that connection and accountability that people with addiction really need. And last, we know that social isolation and perceived lack of support is a predictor of suicide. In one study done on veterans who contacted a suicide hotline for assistance, loneliness was cited as the top reason for wanting to die by suicide. A multitude of other studies show the same connection between perceived lack of connection and support and suicidal behavior. So here we'll look at some of the contributing factors that might put one at risk to be in a situation of social isolation. And you'll see some things look very familiar from the last slide. Because again, we observe that cycle. So first, again, addiction. Isolation is a symptom of addiction. So while isolation may contribute to those addictive behaviors, the addiction itself also puts a person at risk to be less connected to other people. Similarly, mental illness, because again, there's that cycle. But additionally, people who struggle with more severe mental illness, for example, schizophrenia, may have idiosyncratic behaviors, perhaps some deficits in their social skills, which may prevent them from being able to connect to other people naturally in their community. It should also be highlighted that those who are in marginalized groups may be at risk for isolation and lack of support. So one group, for example, may be the LGBTQ community. If someone identifies that way and they do not feel like they have people like them who support them in their community, they're at risk for social isolation. Another group worth highlighting are immigrants, especially because not only may there be some hesitation to join in because they feel othered, but also there is a language barrier, which is kind of, very practical barrier that's in the way of them joining communities and groups. We also know that those who are elderly are at risk for social isolation. Specifically above the age of 70, we see this risk increase. That these people may be more likely to live alone, and perhaps some of their cohort have passed away, so they may not have as many friends in their group. We also may see that they could have difficulty accessing certain supports due to lack of mobility or lack of access to transportation. Unemployment is another risk factor. Often when individuals don't have a lot of friends or family that they rely on, one of their constants in their life to keep them socially engaged is work. So when that is cut off, they may not have access to that connection that they previously had. And last, forced isolation. And I would have never put this piece had it not been for what we've gone through this year in 2020. When schools, workplaces, places of worship all closed, it was like unlike anything we've ever seen in our lifetimes. And we weren't supposed to see each other in person, not supposed to give hugs to people that we're used to hugging or shaking hands with. And this put all of us at risk for isolation and feelings of loneliness and perceived lack of support. I'll also add that some of us, myself included, respond particularly to touch. So we like hugs and feeling physically comforted. And so that lack of touch called touch deprivation may have a significant effect on mood and anxiety specifically. And even before the pandemic came to us, researchers were observing that the rates of loneliness have been on the rise pretty drastically. And I think the reasons for that are still unclear, and we're still trying to figure that piece out. But I would imagine that part of it is due to our involvement in technology. We may be connecting through social media, but do we truly feel supported and connected in that way? Often that trip onto social media might make us feel worse and more disconnected, like maybe we don't belong, maybe we're not good enough, or maybe everybody else is doing something and we have that fear of missing out, FOMO. Um, a study done in 2004 found that 25% of Americans reported that they had not one single person to confide in. And those feelings of loneliness, as we've discussed, often lead to mental health and physical health problems. So we've talked a lot about all the bad stuff. Let's talk a little bit about the inverse. So one of the most interesting things that I found in doing this research is that perceived social connection and support can help you live longer. A review of 148 studies done with over 300,000 participants showed that those who reported feeling strong social connections and perceived social support were 50% more likely to survive throughout these studies than those who did not, controlling for other factors like age, sex, race, and health habits. Another study showed that having social ties reduced the risk of death in those who have a serious medical health condition. And the New England Journal of Medicine followed over 2,300 men who had survived a heart attack over a period of 3 years and found that those who identified having strong social connections were 75% more likely to live during those years of the study than those who lacked that connectedness. That's pretty significant. We know also that social connection benefits mental health. First, it's an important protective factor from mental health disorders, meaning that the presence of social support and connectedness may make it less likely for a person to develop a mental health disorder. Feeling connected to others may create a sense of self-efficacy, like we are useful and helpful to other people, which can create a sense of purpose in our lives, often mitigating some of the depressive symptoms that people see. Also, perceived social connection is linked to lower levels of anxiety and depression, improved self-esteem, and increased empathy. We also see that those with good social connection have better emotion regulation skills, are actually less likely to be violent. One interesting study suggested that social connection is almost like a social cure for depression, or at the very least, a strong preventative measure for relapse of depression. So this study took people who had already had a depressive episode and found that people who participated in at least one social group following their depressive episode were 24% less likely to have a depression relapse. Those who participated in 3 groups were 63% less likely to have a depression relapse. So that social connection is crucial to recovery and maintenance. We also know that participation in social groups can contribute to just healthier lifestyle habits. If we are friends with people or our family with people who are engaging in healthy habits like a good diet and healthy exercise and refraining from excessive substance use, we're more likely to engage in that same activity. So social connection can provide like a positive feedback loop for social, emotional, and physical well-being. Another interesting piece is how important perceived support and connection is for cardiovascular health. Specifically, we see that blood pressure can be reduced in the presence of significant other or a friend. And one study done by Steptoe and colleagues suggests that blood pressure is lower in general in those people who are more socially connected. Also, perceived social connectedness can help protect against the development of carotid artery atherosclerosis and the progression of cardiovascular disease. One thing that I found super interesting is how important social connection is for cognitive functioning, especially as people get older. So a multitude of studies are suggesting that greater connectedness leads to less vulnerability to the progression of cognitive decline. One study done by Barnes and colleagues found that those who had large social networks had a reduced rate of cognitive decline by almost 40%. And when those people actively participated in those groups, that reduction of cognitive decline went up to 91%. That's very significant. Another study demonstrated that memory decline decreased by 50% in those who were more socially connected. And this protective effect of connection appears to increase as age increases. So the older a person gets, the more important those social connections are to preserving one's cognitive health. We also see that connection contributes to improved immune function. We see faster recovery from disease when social connection is greater. And we know that immune functioning is very closely related to stress. And so stress is super detrimental to health. And we saw how much in our previous slides, how much social isolation contributes to stress. Conversely, social connectedness helps to reduce blood pressure and mitigate damaging effects of stress. So oxytocin is another hormone that is released when a person experiences connection with another person. And the release of oxytocin can create feelings of relaxation and stability. Sometimes that can buffer some of the feelings of stress. Lastly, we know that social connectedness can mitigate harmful cortisol levels, offsetting the harmful effects of stress that we discussed previously. So, to sum it up, social isolation is not good, and social connection is very, very important. But here we are in 2020, being told to keep distance from other people, being told to stay at home. And so, how can we create and maintain that connection to others when it seems like we're prevented from being able to do so? So, the first thing we want to talk about is it's not about how many supports and connections you have. Really, more important than anything is quality, that you have people that you can trust, that you can rely on for different things. So, the really first important piece is to identify who is in your social network, who fulfills these various needs of yours, and helps you to feel supported and connected day to day. And it's okay if you have trouble identifying some, but this is where we want to start. We want to figure out who's in our network. Next, we want to ask. We need to ask for what we need. We need to initiate conversation, especially during this time where we may be separated from friends and family and other supports in our lives. It's important that we sometimes initiate contact, maybe even schedule conversation. And last, we need to maintain. So connections need maintenance. We need to be available for those who we rely on for support as well. It goes both ways, right? So to have a friend, you have to be a friend. So we don't want to just check in one time throughout the year of 2020. Maybe we want to check in a few times, schedule a follow-up to once again, visit with that person. I also want to encourage you to this concept of being a sunflower. So a sunflower knows like that it can turn towards the sun. No matter where the sun moves, it moves towards to get what it needs, right? So think about how you can turn towards certain people to get what you need. It's very difficult if we only have one person in our life as a support because often that person can't be everything and anything to us. And maybe they don't have strengths in every area that we need. So think about who in your life do you have that you can just vent to, that's going to listen to you non-judgmentally, maybe not give you a billion solutions to review? Who do you have in your life that is really good with providing solutions and problem solving? They may not be the same person that can listen judgmentally, non-judgmentally. Who can sit with you quietly? Who can you laugh with and have fun with? Who do you go to when there's an emergency? And who's going to hold you accountable to your goals and your self-care? Hopefully you're thinking of the people in your lives that can fill in these blanks. And hopefully it's not the same person for every single one. And if it is, think about how you can expand your network a little bit. We also definitely want to leverage technology. As I said earlier, I think sometimes technology can actually make us feel more isolated, but at the same time, this past year, technology has really helped us to stay connected when there really were no other options. So utilizing apps like FaceTime, Skype, Zoom, all those different video chat apps, and when possible, we do want to use the video feature. We all have mirror neurons in our brains, which means, when you're watching TV and you see someone smile or laugh, you might be more likely to smile or laugh. And so when we are connecting with people facially, visually, that helps us to fulfill that feeling of connectedness a little bit more. There are also apps that take it a step further. It's not just talking, but you can play together. Things like House Party. A lot of pubs and bars who used to do trivia nights are having them online now. That's something that I've really taken advantage of. I'm a huge Seinfeld fan, and I just joined a Seinfeld trivia night, and I felt so connected with 100 strangers. But these things can really help you feel like you're not alone when you are sitting in your apartment all by yourself. Also, think about doing everyday activities via video. So, if you're checking in with a loved one and previous to this, you would go over and cook at mom's house every Sunday, maybe cook online together virtually, or have a birthday party online. Do a video dinner party or game night. Think about ways that you can be creative and connect with other people utilizing technology as a tool. And also, it's really important to understand that some people that you care about um, are not tech savvy and they're going to need support, coaching, and encouragement. And especially if somebody is set in their ways and they have not engaged with technology in the past, they may be a little more stubborn and hesitant to do it. We really want to encourage them to at least try. You may need to talk them through a step by step, but it's going to enhance their quality of life if we allow them to have a little bit more ability in this area. We want to prioritize connecting as a self-care activity. So self-care is a buzzword right now, and it's really not about coping skills. Self-care is really about scheduling time every single day to do things to care for yourself, physically, emotionally, mentally and cognitively, and socially, as well as spiritually. So we want to really make sure that that social self-care is a piece of what we're doing daily, which means we want to schedule time to connect. And that doesn't mean it has to be an all day thing. It can be a 10-minute check in. Consider having a bubble. And I would talk to your doctor and public health experts about this as well. But some families have found it helpful to expand their network of people that they feel safe being with physically. They may have the same safety practices. They may be very good about wearing masks and practicing the basic hygiene and social distancing, so much so that you are able to incorporate them more and see them more face to face. Especially if you're someone that lives alone or has few connections, expanding a little bit to have a bubble may, the benefits of that may outweigh the risks of contracting coronavirus. And again, I would check with your doctor, I would check in with public health experts about it, but it's something worth considering. And if cost is an issue, first of all, there are a lot of programs out there right now that are working to assist, especially families and people who have students in school, to access affordable internet. But think about all of the risks we just reviewed and all of the benefits of connection. And I think that the cost of internet is worth it for your health. And also, this does not replace social connection, but we may have to be creative in finding other ways to provide ourselves with comfort. So first, remember that our pets can also help to facilitate that release of oxytocin, that connection and attachment hormone. So hugging your pets and petting them, that also helps to ease that touch deprivation I touched on earlier. Similarly, having a weighted blanket or a weighted vest, something to weigh you down, may help that feeling of being hugged or held, which can actually help lower blood pressure for some people. And also this concept of hygge, it's like a Scandinavian practice. It's really the art of being cozy. And it's something that, again, that can provide you with some comfort. So things like lighting some candles, having warm light in your house, having lots of cozy and fuzzy things provide that sense of comfort that sometimes being with a friend can provide. Again, this is not a replacement, but we do have to be creative to make sure that we're fulfilling that social need. We also want to remember the old stuff, the stuff that we did before technology came along that helps us to feel good. Use snail mail, send letters. How good does it feel to receive a handwritten letter or a package that was put together just for you? Those things have really great benefits, and we sometimes forget about how powerful and helpful they can be. Also, spend time outdoors. Spending time outside has a lot of mental and physical health benefits. and a lot of things to promote positive mental health. It's also a way that you can connect with people more safely. You still want to take your social distancing precautions and measures, but we see that meeting outdoors tends to be a safer option. So, especially while the weather is still somewhat temperate and not too bad, we want to take advantage of this time to be outdoors with people that we care about. And I really want to emphasize how important it is for us to help support those in our lives who are elderly. We have found that even 10 minutes of conversation can help improve functioning on memory and processing tasks. So even a 10-minute check-in with a loved one who is elderly may help them tremendously, and it may help you too. When we're checking in with our loved ones who are elderly, we also want to make sure that they are engaging in healthy routines so that they're, practicing good hygiene, that they're taking their medication if they need it, that they're eating properly. These things can get neglected without reminders, right? We also may want to encourage projects or things where there is a goal to be met so that the person can feel a sense of completion when they reach that goal. We also want to make sure we're just checking in to make sure that they have all of the necessary basic needs that they need. So, do they have enough food? Do they have enough medicine for the next 30 days? These types of things are very important to remember. We also, this is maybe our person that we have to coach with technology. So we may have to do a little tutorial with them on the phone on how to get the video feature on FaceTime to work or how to use Zoom. I think it is worth the effort of trying to be able to connect these people a little bit more. And last, we want to make sure that these people are maintaining their medical appointments and they have access to safe transportation as well. So I want to thank you for your participation and your for being here with me. We do have some time for some discussion or questions and answers if anybody has any. If you do, you can feel free to utilize the chat feature, or if you're more comfortable, you can feel free to unmute yourself and share whether you have a question or a comment. Okay, kind of a quiet group. I will ask a question if anybody feels brave enough to answer. Oh, what a great question. I will pause. So somebody just entered in the chat. Do you have any advice on setting boundaries with friends? How great and how important? So a lot of people are afraid and hesitant to set boundaries with people they love because they are worried that they're going to make them angry or upset or turn them off. But boundaries are so important to having healthy relationships. So do I have advice? I think the earlier within a relationship that you can set boundaries, the better it is because you're setting the tone for what your friendship or relationship is going to be like. So some examples, if a person maybe is taking advantage of your generosity, I think a great way to start is to get comfortable saying no. And really think about when helping somebody is in both of your best interests, right? Because we want to be generous people. We want to take care of the ones that we love, but we also need to take care of ourselves first. So to get comfortable saying no when it's really not going to be good for us to say yes, when it is really going out of our way, practice that and get comfortable with it and prepare yourself for a response that may not be pleasant, that may be trying to guilt you a little bit. Oh, you don't have time for me or you don't want to be with me. You can very firmly and gently say, it's not that I don't want to be with you. I do want to be with you, but I also need to take care of myself. I think this is a challenge for a lot of us to set those boundaries. Another thing is if a person is continuously hurting your feelings or taking advantage of you, you may have to set a limit and say, if you continue to ask me after I say no, I'm going to have to end this conversation. It sounds firm, but I think, again, we have to be firm to take care of ourselves. If anybody else has any input on boundaries, I would really love to hear about what you have to say. I think this is something we're all struggling with right now because boundaries are blurred right now. Especially if you're working from home. I know for me, it's like I have to change my clothes as soon as I finish working to really set that boundary for myself between work and home. So people can call after you're done working and it feels a little easier to pick up that phone. But if you're talking about work, we want to, not answer work calls after a certain hour. We have to be a little more creative about how we're going to put those boundaries in place now that we have a different way of living. Okay, so I have another really good question here. How do you manage connection for the holidays when there's a challenge with differing views on how to approach it? So, some members who are most at risk might want to be inside with no masks, but others propose something outdoors. You don't want to ruin the holiday, but you want everybody to be safe. I think this is great, and it's something that I'm definitely dealing with in my life right now. I think if you are a host, and you generally are going to host something, you can set the tone by being very clear about what your expectations are. So, I'm inviting you to come for dinner. I'm going to ask that we all wear masks while we're indoors. We'll set up, what my family is doing is they're going to set up places 6 feet apart where, my husband and I sit one place at one table and my parents are going to sit 6 feet away. And my mom laid that out very clearly to us ahead of time about our expectations. Um, if someone else is hosting, another tip is to ask ahead of time. So I was recently invited to a baby shower, and I asked ahead of time, will there be mask wearing and social distancing? It was outside, but some people, are more conservative about it than others. So to get that information ahead of time is also important. I think also we want to really practice from a place of flexibility. So right now we are the last few days of October. Thanksgiving is a month away. So what the numbers look like now may be very different than what they look like in 3 or 4 weeks. So you could have a couple of plans set in place, have some contingency plans. So plan A is that we all get together indoors with masks, sitting apart distance. Plan B is we do like a drive-through thing where you get to see everybody, but it's a very short amount of time spent together. Maybe you sit outside, and if you got a fire pit, you utilize that. And then a plan C is if things are really bad and we are worried about putting people at risk, we're going to have a Zoom Thanksgiving. Try to be creative and have different plans in place depending on what it's going to look like. Um, Another person, I just want to go back to boundaries. That's a very great statement that somebody put out there, using I statements to set boundaries. So if you're not familiar with an I statement, you're really not making it about the other person. When we use I statements, we prevent the other person from having a more defensive response. So when it comes to, Thanksgiving dinner, I feel really unsafe being indoors with 20 people with masks off. I wonder if we can find a way to set the day up so that we all feel safer. Instead of saying, you're going to have 20 people with masks off, that's horrible, right? There's a different feeling to how we approach it. Okay, so there's another question that I'm going to try to address. Somebody is isolated at home and they're not having a lot of connection right now, and there's a hesitation to reach out because they're afraid to burden. And they're usually the one that people turn to. So first of all, I can completely relate. As a therapist, I'm often the person that people turn to. This is really a matter of self-care and prioritization, especially because right now you are a caregiver to someone else. It is really hard to take that step and ask for support. But if you are somebody that other people rely on, that they trust, that they depend on, I can almost guarantee that they're going to want to be there for you, but they're not going to know that you need it unless you put yourself out there. And it's difficult. So maybe you start by just identifying one person in your life that you do have a little bit more of an intimate relationship with, just one person that you can say, hey, I'm struggling. I'm feeling isolated. Can you help me? That doesn't mean that they're going to come over if that's an unsafe move, right? But let them know. If they don't know what you're going through, they're not going to know that you need assistance and connection. So I think starting by putting yourself out there, I know it's difficult. I would also consider, let me be mindful about how I'm going to respond here. Yeah, I think at the way that you're describing yourself and your relationship to others is that you're the go-to, right? Everybody feels comfortable going to you. So it may not feel comfortable for you to reach out. But I would say, again, they're not going to know unless you let them know. But also, I would talk to your partner, your spouse's doctor to find out if there may be a support group that you could be involved in. A lot of times, when spouses or children of people who are ailing are in that caregiver role, there are often a lot of caregiver support groups that can offer you a lot of comfort and help you to feel like there's somebody on your side that really gets what you're going through. And then one person suggested globalpenfriends.com. I've not heard about that, but I'm assuming it's like a pen pal service, which sounds really a very cool way to connect with other people. So I'll allow for any other questions or comments. And I have listed my email address here. So if there's stuff that maybe you're not feel comfortable putting in the chat or you want to reach out about separately, please feel free to reach out to me. I want to take this time again to thank you for your participation, for your really thoughtful questions and contributions to this discussion. And I wish you all the best of luck. Take heart. There are people out there. It feels like we are alone because we're all sitting in our own little pods right now. But look, we're all together on Zoom right now. There are other people out there that want to connect. Let's try to be creative. Oh, one last question. We have a little time. Oh, this is a good one. So this person, it sounds like me. They're on video calls all day long and they want to figure out how else to connect. I'm struggling with that too because I'm on Zoom all day. I don't want to go Zoom after work too. I would say think about snail mail and getting some, I have a couple of friends who I haven't really been able to reach out to as much, and I'm going to write some letters and try to connect with them in a different way to make it feel more diverse for me and a little more exciting for me. Again, I think it's very special to get that type of communication because we don't have it every day. So that would be my suggestion. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for your time today and your participation. Once again, I'll just click to the credits in case anybody wants to see where I got my information from. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and wish you all of the best. Please take care. Goodbye.